So I have 11:01. We're going to go ahead and get started because I am super excited to make sure that you have ample opportunity to hear from our guest co-host today. Once again, this is Intentional Conversations, a virtual community podcast, which is our version of a podcast with recordings with a live virtual audience. And so we are so grateful that every Friday, 11 to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, we always have an audience of people that joins us for our conversations, and we don't take that for granted. So thank you so much for spending some time with us. I am Dr. Nika White, the owner of Nika White Consulting, and I am being supported today by members of my team, Natasha Poritskova, Anna Viola Gutman, and Elvia Pacheco Flores. And so I thank them in advance for their support. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide for me, please. So I always like to make sure that I let you know about some of the upcoming Intentional Conversation podcasts and who we can look forward to. And so on next Friday, October 30th, we have Raven Solomon is going to be joining me as my co-host. And we're going to be talking about corporate clients' responsibility in solving for social justice work. Right now, we're hearing a lot of conversations about corporate social justice work. And so I look forward to Raven joining me for that conversation. And then next slide, please. Following Raven, we're going to have another fantastic co-host, and I look forward to welcoming at that time Kayla Leaf, and I'm so excited that she's going to be joining us as well on November 6th, so go ahead and mark your calendars. Kayla Lee and I are going to be discussing how diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging advocates, how they should show up for others and ourselves, and so I look forward to that conversation. Go ahead and mark your calendars again for November 6th. And we appreciate you in advance being with us. And then next slide. Now, this gets us to the point in time where I can take a moment just to introduce our key guest hosts today. And we have two of them. This is actually the first time, I believe, in the history of Intentional Conversations podcast that we have had the pleasure of having two key guest co-hosts. And so I want to give them a proper introduction, and then I'm going to allow them to just come forth as I usually do and introduce themselves, sharing things that you would not hear or know about them from reading their bios. And so this gets us a little bit of a deeper dive into each of these wonderful individuals. And so I'll start first with Victoria Chance. Victoria is president and co-founder of the nonprofit My Neighbor's Voice in Greenville, South Carolina. After 30 years as a teacher in public schools in rural South Carolina, she left the high school classroom to follow her vision of creating a safe and deeply hospitable forum called My Neighbor's Voice. My Neighbor's Voice is a place where all voices can be heard and protected through a moderated format as a deliberate and direct way to make our community safer and more welcoming for everyone. Ms. Chance received her BA in English from Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, and her master's in contemplative education at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. She is the recipient, along with her co-founder, Mary Ann Inglis, of the Peacemaker Award from the Upstate Mediation Center in 2019 for her nonprofit work, and was a speaker for the local TEDx Greenville Salon in January of 2020. She is married to Potter Bob, has two lovely children, and two stupendous granddaughters. I love that. And then also my next guest today is Mary Ann Inglis. She currently teaches English as a second language. Previously, she managed her husband Bob Inglis's political campaign for the South Carolina Congressional District. She graduated from Duke University with a degree in international relations. She is a member of St. John in the Wilderness Episcopal Church and a board member of Erosha USA, a Christian conservation organization engaged in ecological awareness and habitat improvement. Her husband is executive director of Republican EN, a nonprofit whose goal is to educate and encourage Republicans about free enterprise solutions to climate change. And together they have 5 children. So Victoria, we'll start with you, and then we'll follow up with Mary Ann. I would like for you both just to provide greetings to this audience in whatever way that feels comfortable for you.
Okay. Well, it is our pleasure to be with you, Dr. White. I think to be a part of this intentional conversation is really important for us because that's sort of where we've been spending a lot of our energy since 2017 is in conversation and in dialogue. So this is just a perfect match. I think we share many of the same sensibilities in common. So we are just happy to be here. One thing about me that I think our opportunities with COVID have brought out, and I'm happy to talk about just a little bit, is gardening, because suddenly now I have more time and more energy to spend out of doors, and it has been so informative and so healthy and so positive. And I bet there are many people who are listening to this who have had that same opportunity. I know my neighborhood has certainly spiffed up lately, so that's been really nice. And for that reason, I have appreciated this opportunity that COVID has brought to us.
No, I love that. Yeah, we all are trying to find the silver lining, right, in this global pandemic. And that's important to do as we try to weather the storm, if you will. So Mary Ann, I want to give you a chance as well to greet this audience. How are you today? Thanks for being with us.
I am doing well. I hope you can hear me. I am actually traveling to see our first grandchild. So that's why I'm in a car. I will probably, because of the road noise, I will not be staying on because I don't want to detract from the conversation in that way. But I'm just so thankful to have this opportunity to introduce my neighbor's voice to those who are here today. And I'll just echo the silver lining of COVID being that we have been able to all spend more time on things that are important to us, but also just within my neighbor's voice, we've been able to reach to people across the country and also internationally. And that's been a really exciting development that we were forced to do in a way that we had planned to do, but much later. So that's been a really neat opportunity that we've all embraced and grown from as a result. So unmuted or whichever. Yes. Okay. I'll just do that. And if there is, there's a
why don't you stay on? Why don't you stay on?
Yeah.
The sound is actually sounding pretty clear right now. So why don't you stay on? But we do appreciate, even while you're traveling for a very important reason, those grandbabies I know are really critical to grandparents. And so we appreciate you for that. So we'll look forward to having you on.
I'll just be muted until necessary. Thank you.
Okay, that is great. Thank you so much, Mary Ann. So let's jump right in. I am dying to understand the backstory behind the creation of My Neighbor's Voice. I think that it's such a beautiful sentiment from what I've been able to read and understand about it so far. But the idea stemmed from a notable political figure, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us that story?
Yes, I can. But it starts in October 2016. And there is a famous comedian who's also a heretic, and his name is Bill Maher. And he was interviewing President Barack Obama in the October before that election that happened in November. And Bill Maher asked President Obama, he said, why is there all this division? Why is there this fussing and this tension in the country? What do you think is going on here? And President Obama said, you know what? It's there, but if I could just get in everybody's living room, we wouldn't have this problem. And I thought to myself, well, I know how to do that. But then I didn't think I needed to. So I just forgot it. And then we had that surprise election, like November, and we were all surprised. And so I woke up the next morning thinking, oh my goodness, I've missed something here. I'm shocked by this outcome. And so what did I miss? What did I not hear in the country? And how was it that it was that powerful? And so that's when I realized I was going to have to get in everybody's living room somehow. And so I also called Mary Ann. I called Mary Ann because, and you will discover this over time, I am more of a liberal have a more liberal approach to the world, and my friend Marianne has a more conservative background and approach to the world. And so I thought, in order for us to have some integrity and some modeling of how people come together who might have different points of view, then the two of us need to make this work. And I also thought, you know what, if we can do this in Greenville, South Carolina, we can do it anywhere. So that's how My Neighbor's Voice was born. And what that means is it's an invitation to all our neighbors who happen to be everyone, all of our neighbors, to come to the table and to share thoughts and stories and ideas about how best to live together. So that's how it started. So we are indebted to to the heretic, Bill Maher, and to President Obama for the inspiration for what we're doing. And I did write President Obama, a little note and thanked him.
That is great. So I have to ask, did you get a response back? I would imagine you probably would have led with that.
Well, I did. I'm not sure. It was on official stationery, and it wasn't
okay.
So I'm not exactly sure who wrote it, but
you got a response back. That counts. Okay, that counts, Victoria. That is so great. So tell us more, and I want to bring Marianne into this conversation as well. But describe the overall format of these dinners.
Okay.
What can people expect if they show up to one of these dinners? And I'm sure it looks vastly different pre-COVID than it does now post-COVID as well. So maybe address that too.
Okay. Well, our original vision was to bring people to dinners. So we were going to break bread together, because that is just so deeply important to everyone. And what we ended up doing is getting a whole host or a whole group of volunteer hosts. They would open up their homes. They would prepare a very simple meal, usually vegetarian, soup and bread and cheese and chocolate. And everyone would come. We would sit down at a cozy little sweet dining room table, or sometimes it would be two tables stuck together, because we'd have anywhere from 8 to 10 people at a time. And so we'd sit down, we would start with introductions, and then we have decks of what we call listening cards, and they look just like this, and they have questions on them. And we would pass these questions around. People would take one, they would read it aloud, and then they would have 3 minutes to answer their question. There would be a moderator there. There would be a host who would open her home or his home, and then a moderator would be there to keep the timer and to help people, find the questions or whatever. The beauty of what we do is this. Let's say your question is, what are your thoughts on gun legislation? So you would have 3 minutes to talk about anything you wanted to related to that topic, or any topic you wanted to. You had 3 minutes. So if you needed to take gun legislation to someplace else, you probably could. And then at the end of that 3 minutes, the next person gets a question, and it's a new question. It's not the same question. We're not going to discuss gun legislation. We're going to hear one voice from our community talk about that big topic. And then the next question is another big topic. It's about, what do you think is the best tax structure for Americans? And there's 3 minutes for you. And then the next question is going to be something about perhaps climate change. And 3 minutes. Yeah. The idea is that we go around the table, and we go 4 times, because we have 4 categories of questions. And then at the end, that's when we open up the table to comments and questions. And often people don't have so many questions as much as they have clarifications. They want to go, when I said that about climate change, what I was really meant was this. And they would just clarify something that had come to them. So that's sort of that's the format. At the end of the 3rd round, everybody stands up, and we get dessert. That's always like a high point. And then we come back and finish the last round of questions. What we have noticed, particularly in person at the table, is that the first round, when people are answering these questions, they sort of get a little bit tight around the shoulders. And everybody else does too, because when they hear the question about gun legislation, everybody at the table has some thoughts about it, and they're holding them. And then they realize that the next question is about the tax structure. And so they have to like let go of that other answer they were going to hold on to. And they have to listen to this other answer. And then they have some thoughts about tax structure too, but then they have to let that go. And about the third or fourth question, people start relaxing because they're realizing that this natural propensity we have to formulate a response and not listen, they can shut that down a little bit. And so by the end of the evening, people are hearing one another without fear. What we're selling is hospitality. We're selling congeniality. We're selling a safe place for us to talk about our stories and how we live together. So,
and to center all of those voices. I love this concept, and I think that it certainly is necessary right now when we find ourselves at this place where there's so much, people are really emotionally charged by all that's happening, and they're triggered in many regards. And so sometimes we have to have a disciplined structure in order for us to have healthy dialogue. And you're right, getting back to the basics of just actively listening to really learn and understand, and not just waiting your turn to respond. And so I often speak about the difference between a response versus a reaction. And a reaction is like in the moment, right? But I love the idea of having people just to sit with what they're hearing, and then later on be able to have discussion about it, because I think it allows us to be much more thoughtful. And so, Marianne, I want to get you into this discussion. What are some of your highlights of these dinners that really has been resonating with you?
Well, I think everything that Victoria has said is true for every dinner that we've had, and even as we go on the online forum. I think that what's really neat is that when you do just spend time listening, you don't just hear others, you also start listening to yourself, and you find out a lot about yourself as you formulate your answers. And you find out, oh, well, maybe I didn't quite think that strongly about that, or maybe that I should consider about that issue. So I think that's what is really very special. And an example of that is one of our first dinners was a gentleman in his 70s who really thought he knew the answer to everything. And after our first round, I was moderating. He said, oh, I could have answered every one of those questions if you'd given me a chance. And I said, well, at the end of our time together, we'll have time for you to answer some of those questions. And so at the end of our time, we had those 20 minutes. He said, well, I could take the whole 20 minutes if you let me. And I said, well, perhaps we'll let some others just give a few thoughts before you take the floor. And so we went around, and we had a very diverse group that day. We had, age-wise, we had a very diverse group, and also faith-wise, we had the Muslim community represented, the Christian community, and I don't think we had the Jewish community at that event. But then we also had some members of the LGBTQIA community there, and it was just a lovely dinner. And at the end of that, he said, well, I think I've just learned that we're all more alike than different. And I was just like, mission accomplished. I mean,
mission accomplished.
Yeah, we are all in this community on this lovely earth together, and we all need to listen to one another. And I think one of the reasons I was so interested and involved and excited about joining Victoria in her invitation was I witnessed firsthand what it looked like not to have people listen when I was working in my husband's campaigns. And that was a growing frustration for me. And I felt like this is a way that I could have a positive impact on bringing people back together. And it has been a very positive impact for me personally, but also I think for all those who've been a part of it. We've heard some criticisms, but for the most part, positive, which has been great.
That is great. And dialogue is so important. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that we struggle as a society. We don't know how to listen and communicate with each other in a way that leaves each person with dignity as they walk away. The goal is not always to agree, but the goal is to make sure that we are centering people's voices and we're being open. And so, Marianne, you introduced the idea of the moderator. So I'm visualizing this dinner table with all these different people with different perspectives, and everybody is really just, chomping at the bit to want to share. And I can imagine that the moderator's role is very critical to how effective these dinners are. And so talk with me, either one of you, about how do you prepare those moderators to be able to be equipped to handle when the conversations can potentially go awry, because that's always a possibility and a risk. And so who would like to take that?
Well, we have moderator training. As you might imagine, Dr. White, people who want to be a moderator have some idea about being engaging, but also being able to diplomatically redirect in that. Okay, because sometimes you're right. Sometimes in a group there will be what we call a warrior for something. It can be anything. It can be a religious point of view, but it can also be a political point of view. Although I will take this 1 second to say these questions that we ask, although they of course belong in the political world, they don't and are not necessarily political. The only time you would have to name a politician is we do have a question about who is your favorite, past or present. But otherwise, it's not, people often take them into the political realm, but they don't have to. But the moderator has to be aware of those people who, say, go over their time because they're sort of caught up in that energy, to say, we will have more time at the end for you to come back to this. We appreciate your passion. Your dedication to this topic. It is important, but we're going to stop now so that we can hear more voices. So we do that as gently and as consciously, intentionally, if you will, as possible, because we want all those voices and we want to protect each one. It doesn't matter. When you're with us, you speak 20% of the time, but you listen 80% of the time. We've got to protect each voice, and that's how we train our moderators, is to protect the voice, but to keep the format, because it's the format that keeps us all safe. In terms of equity here, there is no hierarchy of expertise at our table. Nobody's in charge in terms of what's the right answer. There aren't any. All the questions belong, all of these questions, gun legislation, healthcare, climate change, they belong to all of us. No one race, ethnicity, religious tradition owns any of these. Questions about the police force, our prison system, addiction, we all own these. And so we all share them, and we share a vested interest in hearing what our community thinks about them. The timer, the 3-minute timer, is the same for everyone. No one gets more or less, except for those warriors that we have to hook.
Reel in a little bit, right?
So that's our goal, and we work with our moderators constantly to make sure that they feel safe, of course, but also that they can create safety. That's our goal.
Absolutely. And creating that psychological safety for people to feel free to lean into their vulnerabilities and to share really their thoughts without feeling as though they're going to be judged. Our thoughts are our thoughts. I think it's really important. And so I love the 80-20 rule. And I think that whether it's within the dinner setting or not, we probably all can be well served by trying to adopt that, Let's listen more than we do speak and talk. And then I love the clarification of the questions are not about people. Right. They're about issues, and issues that all of us should be able to engage and dialogue around. And so that's fantastic. Now, you've talked at a high level about some of the topics and the categories. I want to get a little bit more granular in that, because you gave us a show and tell a moment ago where you picked up the little tin can with the cards in there. So I want you to tell us more about how do you come up with the questions, and what are some of these specific questions?
Marianne, do you want to talk a little bit about our questions?
Sure. And also, I'd like to just add to what Victoria said about this not being specifically a political conversation, although we started at this nonprofit, or with this nonprofit, after the last presidential election. And as a result of it, President Obama's invitation and encouragement, it really has evolved into just making sure that everyone feels comfortable at the table, no matter where they stand and what they feel the issues. So our main goal is to make sure that all communities feel welcome, all members of the community feel welcome. Mm-hmm. That are they're not political questions, they're community questions. We have 4 categories, and they are our society, civic rights and responsibilities, health and environment, and political thought being politician. And we've been with our online category paper. So because we're not coming into and we're not getting to have that normal chit chat that you have before you sit down at a table. So we have some hello neighbor questions like, or you see as the value of museums, or what are some, they just said like about the garden. So those are some really, I
think we
really
lost
pick
her.
up there about our questions, and she was talking about our Hello Neighbor category. And my favorite in Hello Neighbor is, what do you think being literate, how do you think being literate has impacted your life? And the stories are lovely and wonderful. One young man talked about his mother would give him $5 for every poem he could recite. I know, wasn't that great? That was my son.
Yeah.
And I forgot about it.
I love that.
But
I love that.
Our questions have gone through an evolution. At first we too were sort of energized about, how can we make people do right? And we wanted to sort of guide those questions to the right answer. And since then, we have truly cleaned up and streamlined our questions for story. So I'm going to tell you a tiny story about one example. At our very first dinner, there was a woman there named Chandra Dillard. And you may know Miss Dillard.
Yes.
All right, so she got the question, what does liberty and justice for all mean to you? And that was the whole question. And so Chandra Dillard started talking about liberty and justice, but she talked about it in a way I had never heard before. And it was about there are 2 kinds of liberty and justice. And there's the one that's that idea, that ideology that we all aspire to. And then there's the real liberty and justice that seems to favor white people more often than brown or black people. And she talked so passionately and deliberately about that. And it was powerful, as you might imagine. So now our question is this: what does liberty and justice for all mean to you? And do you think most Americans share your understanding? So that's, and we have many examples of figuring out.
I'm sure. And it sounds like you sell the cards as well. So if someone wanted to be able to use that as a tool just to engage their neighbor or a family member or whatever the case may be,
Absolutely.
you do provide those as well.
You can go on our website, myneighborsvoice.org, and we will mail them to you. If you're in Greenville, I can deliver. But yes, we can get those out. And Thanksgiving might be just the perfect time to have a little set of cards handy for that.
I agree. I think that's great. I think that's such a great idea. And you mentioned Representative Chandra Dillard. She's definitely a favorite among many of us that are in South Carolina.
Okay, but I will say, normally I would never out anyone who was at my table, but I don't think Representative Dillard would mind this one time.
Sure. Well, you know what keeps coming to mind for me is that, we've often have used ourselves probably, or certainly we've heard people talk about, well, who's at the table? Who are you bringing to the table? Who has a seat at the table? And so just conceptually, I think the idea of breaking bread together around a table where everyone has a voice and the voice is centered, where all eyes and ears are on them at that moment, is just such a lovely thing. And so I'm loving this concept. Tell me how you've had to adapt this since COVID.
Okay. Well, it took us a while because everything shut down in March. Of course, we had fundraisers and dinners and all kinds of things. So we had to just stop. And then it took us a minute to believe that what we had so intimately at a table, we could ever translate to something online. At first, it just didn't even feel like it was possible. But then we also decided we had absolutely nothing to lose. So we can try it. And that's what we've been able to do. And surprisingly, our dinner would last 2.5 hours. Okay. And we had those 4 categories that we had. So what we did is we have now streamlined that so that we just do one category at a time. And so now this is what we have learned. And I think this learning, because we just started in June, what we have learned is that listening is a practice. Mm-hmm. And now people can come again and again and again. We have different questions and we always have different voices. So that this practice of listening and sort of absorbing what the community has to offer in terms of wisdom and in terms of reflection is just invaluable. We also find people who want to stay together once they come together in a group, and our online groups are only 5 or 6. We don't do, because you can't hear that many voices. So that group will repeat itself and will come together for the next forum and then next forum. And that has been really powerful. And as you know, I'm sure we've got people in New Zealand and in Israel and in Boston and in Colorado and in California and in, Easley, and they're all coming. And it's so fun. So that's been helpful. We've also started cultivating what we call ambassadors. And these are primarily students, but they don't necessarily have to be, but they're students who are recruiting for us in a particular audience. For example, we have a student at North Greenville University, Emily Epps, and she's a moderator, and her job is to recruit those voices from North Greenville University to come to the table. So we are able to pay Emily as an ambassador $50 for each event she can moderate. And so we have learned that sometimes we need to just bring one community together to sort of experience this among themselves before they enter the great population of crazy or change. And
I love that. Yeah. So I was just going to say, internally, then organizations can have one of these My Neighbor's Voice dinners or gatherings, but then as well as where you're bringing people from all different sectors that may not even know each other at all or be affiliated with any of the same type of organization.
And it has it's a growing opportunity, but it's also been so enriching because we have some of these voices, especially young voices, student voices. They are a little more tentative, but when, you know, they also become, by the end of an evening, especially at a dinner, when you have these youngsters at the table, and we usually start with around 17, by the end, because they've had one, there's also another rule for our events, and that's no cell phones. So these students who don't even know how to live without a cell phone are suddenly speaking, and they are not interrupted, and they are not questioned. No one's using it as a teaching moment, you know, oh, let me help you. None of that. Their voices stand just like they are. And so by the end of the evening, these students feel empowered. They feel important because we've listened to them. And, you know, they don't know much about the tax structure, but they also admit that. But then they also speculate on what it might be like. And once you start speculating on the prison system, for example, then you may be more sensitive to the next time you hear about someone or something related to that prison system. And that's the beauty of what we do. Every experience that you have at a My Neighbor's Voice event carries through, so that the next day, the next week, when you're listening to your favorite television show or reading something, there's a connection. I know someone who believes that too. I know someone else, and I love, you know, they were so funny. You know, we are making connections so that we are real people living together in community and trying to figure out how best to do that together. And it's it is hard.
Yeah. So we're getting some really good questions into the chat. So I want to start bringing in our neighbors' voices, which are the people that are connected to this community, to allow them to share their questions. So I'm going to address this first question, which is from Frank. And Frank says, I'm curious if upbringing comes up in these conversations and how that comes out. Like my parents taught me, we don't talk politics, religion, or our bank accounts growing up. However, I love talking about these things and intersections with DEI.
Well, we have lots of examples of people who felt just like that, and they go one way or the other. One way, when you get a question, one woman got this question, and it was about what does the term pro-life mean to you? And she looked at it and she went, because you can skip. So she passed on that.
Okay.
But then at the end, when she was writing her survey, she kicked herself for doing that. She said, for the first time in my life, I had a way to express exactly what I felt about that topic without interruption, without anyone questioning what I was doing, and I blew it. So there's that kind of reflection. And then there are also, these are questions about that. We ask questions about hospice. We ask questions about pro-choice. We ask questions about the LGBTQ community. And people, you can pass, but when people do grapple with them, we all benefit. We just all benefit from honesty.
I agree.
I have another little story, or do you want to go to another question, or can I tell you? Okay, all right. Well, I had a fabulous, wonderful, amazing group of Muslim women. Okay, and they came to my home, and we did have a dinner. It was just lovely, and some were in hijab, and some were not, and I just can't tell you how fun it was. But there was a question. We had two questions in our deck about the LGBTQIA community. One was, how do you think the marriage has impacted our communities? And one woman felt like it was a very negative impact, and she was very certain that this was a negative impact and that it shouldn't be allowed. And she was pretty adamant about it. Okay, and to say, and it was fine. A couple of rounds later, another Muslim woman got the question about the LGBTQ community, how we should protect the rights of these citizens. And she held forth about how, of course, we should protect the rights of these citizens. It shouldn't even be a question that these people are viable and wonderful and full citizens of our world, and we should embrace them in love and generosity. Okay. So on those surveys at the end, what most of these women talked about was they had never heard the LGBTQIA community defended within their community, and how remarkable it was. That's how we know we're doing something right. We're stretching people just a little bit, and it's important.
I love that. Intersectionality. I think that's critically important. This is awesome. Okay, so this next question comes from Edmund. Great conversation, but sorry, I have not been able to even talk to my mom, let alone coworkers, about Trump. He just makes me so sick. How can I listen to someone that likes him and his lies? Sorry, can they address the elephant in the room? And so I think it's a fair question. Sometimes hostility certainly can surface into these conversations where people are really strong in their emotions about certain topics. So how do you handle that level of hostility? And this could be a good conversation for the present time we're in now, because we're coming up on election. And so people are obviously having these conversations. So share your thoughts.
Okay. Thank you for pointing at the elephant. We're welcome. We're glad to have him. All right. The other day, I invited my neighbor who has a big Trump sign, and he's a supporter. And I sat him on my front porch, properly distanced. And we used these cards to talk about the issues. We didn't talk about Trump. We talked about healthcare. And what do you think? What is happening to our healthcare system right this minute? And are people being served? It was about in our community. We talked about gun legislation. This man, because I live in the county, is able to shoot his guns at 4:00 on Sunday afternoons. And he can, and he does. We talked about gun legislation, not because he's within his legal rights to do all of that. I sometimes think that's a poor choice of maybe timing or something. But we talked about guns, and we talked about his legal right to own them, and my propensity toward maybe limiting some of those guns in the world. But we could talk about using this format, using these questions, you can talk about anything. And also that little timer, at the end of the 3 minutes, you switch, you choose another topic. And none of that is hard when people are involved in with a politician. That's why we want to bring it down just a notch, so that we're talking about how politics works. And the way we define politics is it's the distribution of status, it's the distribution of wealth and resources within a people, within a community. And that's quite safe. And politics works in our families, it works in our churches, it works in every institution that we have. So I know the hardship and I know the struggle when we are trying to deal with politicians. But if you could ever just, try to invite people to step back from the politicians and to the community, we call these universal community questions. And they belong to all of us. And we all need to hear one another talk about these kinds of issues. There's a question, what's one of the hardest things you've ever done in your personal, academic, or professional life? And was there any community expectation, support, or engagement? That's a great place to start about how we live together. So the elephant is still here, okay? and we'll always be here. But there are skillful ways to come together.
Thank you, Victoria. And we do need to, as citizens, be equipped to be able to have these hard conversations, because the alternative is just to ignore it. And then we're festering all of those thoughts and we're harboring that. And that ends up coming out in other ways through aggression and through anger. And I think that certainly impedes our ability to have healthy relationships, which we need to be able to do that. And so I was interested in the fact that when you mentioned your neighbor, as the two of you were having a conversation, the same rules apply. So you even have the timer as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that helps, because some people are going to want to stay on that one topic because they really want to get their point across and they really want to get you to see their side. But I love the fact that even if it's a one-on-one, you implement the timing factor to be able to
call that one-on-one is cafe listening.
Okay, I love that. Yeah.
And you can do it with 1 to 4 people. And we have instructions in our little box for all of them.
We've thought about everything. Well, keep your questions coming. And I do also want to acknowledge our live Facebook audience that's joining us today. We do appreciate you being a part of Intentional Conversations podcast. So I'm going to go to another question, and then I will also go back and take a look at our chat to see what questions our audience have. But so here's a question that relates to people who want to bring this opportunity to their respective organizations, their families, their circle. How do they just go to your website and sign up? What is the process like?
You can go to our website and sign up and send us a note. You can, yes. And we have workshops available for organizations. We recently did one for Brains on Fire. We just did an hour. Their regular Wednesday afternoon meeting was, so we did just an exercise in my neighbor's voice. And something that happens very often is you are answering these questions, and these are not the questions that you talk about as you pass each other in the hall. And they're not the questions that you might bring up at, in the break room.
Right.
So when people are talking about their experiences with poverty, or they're talking about their experiences with, the police force or race relations, suddenly you get a new perspective of someone, a colleague, that it enriches that community life, that communal life that we're trying to make stronger. One man who came to a dinner said, "You know what? I've had friends for 20 years and I don't know them nearly as well as I know the people sitting around this table now." And he was so excited that we can ask these questions of each other.
Yeah.
We should.
Yeah. Who are the people that you most often attract to these dinners? And I'm sure that it's a broad, vast audience, but
we do have okay, you're going to love this. And I'm going to say it: white women who like to hike.
Really? I wasn't expecting you to say that, Victoria.
I know.
But that specificity, okay, white women who like to hike. Why do you think that's the case?
Okay, many of them are retired.
Okay.
Many of them are looking to save the world. And they feel like they have a little bit of time, and they are supporting us. And they are, they have that energy. Now, that's probably not exactly true, but if you look at Marianne, there we are, and we are a little bit older, and we sort of see, and I think it's women who are carrying this forward, because they are in touch with the fact that we've lost that capacity to communicate in a sincere and respectful way. And I think it's our job to do that. At every table we have great diversity, but right now it's primarily women who are holding up my neighbor's voice, and they're doing it, some as a spiritual practice, some as a political act that's positive in our community. And then, most of us just believe in what we're doing. So that might be the case.
So any strategies for I think it's interesting that you found that that's kind of the sweet spot in terms of the population that's really emboldened to be involved in these types of endeavors. What are your strategies, though, to ensure that level of diversity at the table? Like, how do you get the word out to different audiences and communities and people, especially those that maybe are not the ones who are already drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will, and they recognize the importance of healthy dialogue?
You know, Dr. White, I would suggest to you that sometimes you have to serve the Kool-Aid to get support, you know, and to sort of make sure that we are inviting those people who do sort of agree with the idea that we can and should come together. But that is our biggest challenge. I just wrote a grant, and my grant is designed for how to engage the Black and Brown community more reliably every single time, because until we do, we are not there yet. Mm-hmm. And that is our focus right now. Right. And that's why I am so honored to be sitting right here with you, because this is a step forward. You know, I have worked with the Reverend Tony Parks. I have worked with Alicia Brewster at Sustaining Way. You know, there are lots of folks who are, Alicia she's done so many things with us and at our tables and virtually, you know, so we're there, but we have got to expand ourselves, and we've got to be physically visible in this community. This should be our practice as a community, that we come together and we listen, and we come together and we listen, and no one owns these questions. They don't belong to anyone. They belong to all of us.
I like that. I'm watching the time as it narrows down, but there is another question. I'm going to paraphrase this question. It's coming from Rachel, but the gist of the question is it okay to just avoid the really strong-willed people for peace of mind? You know, we talk a lot about self-care too, so sometimes people may see it as more appropriate for me not to engage in such conversations. So what would you say to that?
I would say yes, but I would also suggest that if you have a strong-willed person, that the two of you come to a My Neighbor's Voice event, so that the container, the format, holds everybody's energy. It's hard one-on-one or in a small group with no rules and no parameters to not be overwhelmed. It's easy. We all fall victim, or sometimes if you're maybe a little forceful, you might do it to other people. So it's our format that keeps everyone safe and everyone able to speak their piece. And it's so valuable. So yes, protect yourself, but invite that voice, that energy, to this kind of event. And then you honor one another in that way.
Had a dinner, Victoria, that went awry, where it was, or maybe it didn't completely go awry in that direction. And it was kind of interested to hear about the experiences that may not have gone as expected.
Yeah. The first one. That's why we got a timer the next day. Timers saved us so many times. We have had those warriors, those people who have great energy, and they have a dedicated sort of feeling about or information about a particular topic. And what you find is when they get whatever question they get, they might somehow circle back to their favorite topic, and that's okay. The one time that I was present where someone wanted to go over the time, wanted to just go on and on. Eventually it was the group it was just the group dynamic and the group energy that once I said, you know, we appreciate your passion, we appreciate your effort and energy in this way, but we want to hear more voices. And it worked just fine. People come to these events and they're coming because they want to be here and they want to explore what this means to a community. So for the most part, people are not here to jeopardize what we're doing. They're trying to listen or trying to act like they're listening, one of them. So, we're human, we have energy, but for the most part, people who come to My Neighbor's Voices are pretty well behaved, and they are also brave.
Yeah.
Because you have to speak in front of strangers, and not everybody thinks that's darling.
You're so right. And so my heart in some regards goes out to the introverts who, find themselves actually in that setting. And it's a bit of a challenge for them. So you're right. It definitely takes being courageous, being brave, and choosing courage over comfort, I like to often say. So I love that. So we have just a few moments left, and I want you to talk about funding, because I'm sure there are people in this community that are hearing this story like myself, and we're all like, this is such a great idea. We want to be able to support it. We know that you are a nonprofit, but how are you funded?
Well, okay, thank you for asking. It's almost like right now with coronavirus and so many events in this world besides fire and climate change and turmoil. My Neighbor's Voice is not as glamorous as, feeding children who are hungry, okay, as a nonprofit. It's just not that glamorous. And so what we have discovered is that the people who come and participate are the people who give us those recurring donations, those little monthly donations that just keep us afloat. So most of the people who support us is because they've participated and they know what we're doing and know its value. And the value is subtle, but it is lasting. Yeah. So we do write grants. In fact, we're working on one right this minute. So we're working, we do grants, but our grants are small because, again, we are not as glamorous as some other initiatives right this minute. And we understand that. We're like the vet. If the culture is doing well, then vets do well. If culture starts going down a little bit, or economics, then vets sort of, don't do as well. So we're the vet of the nonprofit world. And so we welcome those sweet donations. And we have some foundations who every now and then give us that boost that we need. So we're hopeful. We're desperately hopeful that this is all going to work out just fine. But it comes from the more participants that we have, the more money we get, and it works. And so we have a donate button probably everywhere. But if you go on our website, please go on our website and donate. And any amount is just perfect. And we also have a wee little podcast.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And you can hear all our voices from everywhere.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Is it called All Our Voices, or is it called also My Neighbor's Voice?
My Neighbor's Voice. And it's fantastic. On iTunes, I'm pretty sure. I mean, we have 3 episodes.
That's great. So we'll make sure that in the follow-up communication to all of those who joined today, where we will send the replay, the link to the replay, we'll also have your website and information on your podcast. And so we've already placed it into the chat as well. This has been so great. We probably have maybe 60 seconds left, and I want to give Victoria, you, and Mary Ann. I want to see if we can get Mary Ann back on, just to take us out and share any parting remarks that you would like for this community to know, perhaps that we have not had an opportunity to touch on. So we'll start with you, Victoria, and then Mary Ann. If you're with us, we would love for you to come back on and just to share some parting remarks quickly as well.
Okay. Well, again, Dr. White and your whole team, they've just been phenomenal to bring us together and to get us together. I would say this, that at some level, My Neighbor's Voice is about love and about listening as a loving act. And we also need to love our neighbors. And that means just about everyone. In fact, it means everyone. So that would be my invitation to everyone, is to come to our tables, come to our events. They happen the second Thursday of every single month, and often in between. Let us serve you, and let us learn to practice listening to one another together, so that we can make our community safer, more productive, and so that we can all thrive together.
Mary Ann, are you still with us by chance? I don't believe she is, but nonetheless, please, please, please thank her for us. We know that she had some technical difficulties because of her travel, but we're so grateful that she decided to spend at least a few moments with us while she was able to. What you're doing is remarkable, and I hope that this platform is going to expose more people to My Neighbor's Voice, because I appreciate the work that you all are doing. And I can tell that as educators, that the students that have the ability to be under your leadership and under Mary Ann's leadership, we're very we're gifted, because the level of compassion and empathy that you bring just to human nature, I think that is such an important trait for educators. And so I have to say that as well. But nonetheless, thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a great weekend. We will be back here next Friday for Intentional Conversations virtual community chat, which is our Vodcast. And we hope that you all have enjoyed your time together today. We don't take it lightly that you have visited with us, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thank you again so much, Victoria. We appreciate it.